on the phone Zoe Carpenter, a reporter for The Nation magazine based in Washington, D.C. Welcome to the program, Zoe.
Thanks for having me.
So let's talk about this. Give us a sense of what you mean when you talk about phony populists.
So I'm talking about Democrats who have great talk about tackling inequality and making that one of the party's priorities. But when you actually examine the agenda that they're promoting, much of that agenda is actually about a sort of modified trickle-down economics, embracing the energy of the private sector. And there's much reason to believe that that actually would worsen inequality and that it's merely an opportunistic ploy.
All right. Well, let's get to that part about these type of trickle-down policies exacerbating the wealth inequality in this country, income inequality, I should say. But you use an example of President Obama in late January, speaking as to the issue of income inequality, but he did so in sort of I guess, an ironic context. Just tell us about that, because I think it is pretty illustrative.
Sure. So this was a meeting with a variety of CEOs regarding unemployment insurance for the long-term unemployed. As you probably know, the Republicans have resisted extending unemployment benefits for those who have been out of work for a long time. And so in an attempt to do something about that, the president asked several CEOs to sign a best practices pledge promising to hire or not to discriminate against those who have been unable to find work for a long time, which, is all well and good. However, if you look at the CEOs who are in the room, we have Don Thompson, the CEO of McDonald's, whose restaurant workers are paid so little that they have to rely on, over $1 billion in public assistance each year just to get by. Also, Jim McNerney of Boeing, who earned more than $23 million last year, but also threatened to move his company to a right-to-work state if the machinists union did not accept a pay freeze and a pension cut and things like that. So Obama was praising these CEOs for their participation in this unemployment plan, and celebrating their participation with no sense of acknowledgement that their practices directly hurt workers and have led to the huge gap between workers and CEOs.
And you say that it very neatly illustrates the Democratic Party's current predicament. I mean, where else do we see examples of this talk the talk, but not necessarily walk the walk? Or I should say, let me, before we get there, I mean, what do you think goes on in the minds of the administration? I mean, even as a sales job for some type of populism, this seems to be a little bit tin-earish. Or is it simply, I mean, how calibrated, I mean, are they trying to put on this image? And do Democrats attempt to use this sort of veneer of populism? Because this isn't, that I guess that picture of the CEOs saying that we're going to vaguely commit to not discriminating against long-term unemployed to give them really crappy jobs. How much does the White House think that this is projecting a populist vision?
I'm not sure about their motivations exactly. I think that the administration's desire to do something about inequality is really sincere, and that's true for the majority of the Democratic Party. However, I think that there's also an attempt to repackage these Rubinomic-esque ideas into this new framework of concern for inequality and populism. And I think it's pretty clear that there's tremendous pressure to address inequality, that it's an opportunity and both a challenge that the party has to take on right now. I don't think it's something that can be avoided. But it's very inconvenient for the center of the party if they have to, if this sort of anti-inequality agenda challenges their core beliefs about the free market, which it seems to do.
Yeah, well, I mean, let's talk about Chuck Schumer. He's another guy who sort of seems to have hold these two notions in his head. And I have to say, I mean, let's talk about that. I don't want to get ahead of myself here.
Sure. So Chuck Schumer, he's the third-ranking Democrat in the Senate, and he's one of the party's biggest recipients of Wall Street campaign donations. And he has been really forcefully behind a populist approach to campaigning this year. So he thinks the Democrats should campaign on a handful of simple, straightforward principles of support for working families. College affordability, raising the minimum wage, extended unemployment insurance, equal pay for women. Those are some of the things that he's advocated for. And we're seeing those pop up now in the Senate. The Senate is holding votes on a lot of these measures, which won't pass because of Republican filibusters, but it's a great campaign speech. However, Schumer, his ties with Wall Street and his actions around financial deregulation in the past sort of makes one question his real commitment to fundamentally changing the structures of an economy that doesn't work for everyone.
Well, I mean, so when you talk about phony populists, I mean, this is sort of, I guess, I mean, would you contemplate? I mean, is he a phony populist, or I mean, is this sort of just are you really trying to express a dilemma here that one, there's sincere desire to deal with income inequality, but the mechanisms are flawed?
I think there are examples of both in this piece. Schumer might be more an example of the latter, but then you have someone like the Google chairman Eric Schmidt, who laid out an inequality agenda, which the third pillar of which has to do with special treatment for the tech sector. And so that's clearly opportunistic, and that's clearly phony, since we know that the tech sector is one of the best examples right now of American inequality.
And so, I mean, let's talk about that tech sector solutions for inequality.
Sure. So the tech sector, the Silicon Valley elite are getting more involved in politics, particularly Democratic politics. They're one of the emerging power centers of the party. And, we see people like Ro Khanna, who's running for Congress in California, speaking the language of the new populism, talking about support for working people. But it's not actually clear that they would do anything for working people that required them to sacrifice some of their special privileges. And, someone like Jack Dorsey, who's a Twitter co-founder, he has acknowledged that the tech companies bear some responsibility for the economic divide in the Valley. But he seems sort of oblivious to the scale of inequality, saying that one of the countermeasures he's most proud of is picking up trash in the neighborhood. There's this sort of disconnect between rhetoric and reality, I think.
Yeah, and so, I mean, when you talk about the level of sincerity of the Obama administration, I'm just using them as an example, but they are concerned about income inequality, but it seems to me that surely they must have access to the same data that you and I have. You mentioned in your piece, you speak to Joseph Stiglitz. When he outlines the things that need to be done to address income inequality, what does he outline? I mean, for those people who, I mean, it seems to me there's two types of people here, or three types, right? One is those people who are genuinely concerned about income inequality and talk about larger structural forces and perceive the need for those changes. One, the Obama administration, which by your assessment, is sincere about income inequality, but ignores those aspects of it for sort of more small bore things. And then the third group, which talks about income inequality because it is expedient. I mean, when people are talking about those structural changes, what are they talking about?
So I think to get down to that core difference, what's really happening is that the two sides are explaining things in different ways. So when someone like Stiglitz talks about inequality, or Senator Elizabeth Warren, for example, they see the massive gains at the top as being connected fundamentally to losses at the middle and at the bottom. So the kinds of solutions they would advocate for would affect people at the top. It would stop the flow of wealth, the appropriation of wealth to the top. Now, when someone like Obama talks about inequality, or certainly the Silicon Valley moguls, the way they tend to do it is by explaining losses at the middle and the bottom as being disconnected from the top. That it's something that happened to us, that globalization and technology have disadvantaged the American worker, and this allows them to promote solutions, job training, for example, education, which are good, but they wouldn't trouble the 1%, and they really wouldn't reverse the flow of wealth from workers to their bosses.
Right. I mean, it wouldn't diminish income inequality, in other words.
Right. It would be sort of a Band-Aid. It would be better, perhaps, than it is now to raise the minimum wage, for example. We certainly should do that. But that's not going to stop the fact that CEOs are making hundreds of times what workers would be, even if they earn $10.10 an hour.
And so one of the things you point out is really the dilemma here is, are there any Democrats who are willing to engage in what at least some of us perceive is an ongoing class war?
Yes, there are Democrats who are pushing back against this notion of inequality as something that just happened to America and are saying instead, no, look, this is a deliberate policy choice and we have to change our policies in order to fix inequality in a big way. People like Sherrod Brown, who won a very tough election race in Ohio, with a pro-labor message, and he certainly spared few harsh words for financial interests, and he was pretty clear about that message, and he told me that he thinks that Democrats should be braver about standing up to accusations of class warfare, because, it's pretty clear that the class warfare is already happening, and, as Warren Buffett said, the 1%, they're winning, and so effectively, you're choosing sides by opting out.
And so what, I mean, so what can be done in this instance? I mean, if there is a broad awareness of income inequality as a problem, but and it seems to me, at least I don't know if the preponderance of Democrats, but certainly at the highest levels, there's a sense of that this can be fixed with a mix of proposals that will enhance the bottom without touching the top in some way, as if we can just sort of make this pie just keep growing and growing despite the fact that gains are being made by one end and not the other. How does this come about? In other words, if everybody's accepted the proposition, either for cynical or more benevolent reasons of income inequality, but the assessments of what causes it are different, how is that argument won politically?
I think it has to be won first popularly. I think we need a broader movement from the streets that can really convince elected officials and politicians that the people are ready for stronger stuff, right? Minimum wage, that polls well, not only for Democrats but also for Republicans, and a whole host of other sort of small bore populist measures is already really popular. So I think the energy is out there to keep moving in that direction. I think people are eager to hear something new, and certainly it's a significant challenge. There hasn't been something post-Occupy that seems that broad in scope in terms of economic justice, but this really is about justice, and in that sense, I think people are ready for a story that really clearly lays out who the champions are and who the villains are, perhaps.
And what do you make of President Obama's sort of rhetorical, I guess, transition from income inequality to opportunity?
I think that's just a way of muddying the waters. If you're talking about building opportunity, that's something that's vaguer. What is opportunity? It moves one away from the structural critiques of the economy. And so I think it's just a response to the sort of freak out about class warfare, and I think it's misguided.
Yeah, I mean, it is. I mean, it seems to me that the last thing you'd want to do going into an off-year election, when we have now poll after poll showing that the Democratic base is planning on staying home, or at least in larger numbers than it did in 2012. Why would you want to muddy the waters?
I don't know, and that's a good question. And just to clarify, opportunity is important. That is something fundamental to our self-conception as Americans, the idea that even if you're born poor, if you're born unequal, you should have the opportunity to move up. So it's not that opportunity isn't a good thing to aspire to. It just seems like the rhetorical switch is more a cover for a softer policy stance.
Do you have a sense of where the biggest pushes for genuine populism are coming from within the Democratic Party, or at least the left, more broadly speaking?
Well, I think right now the minimum wage is really the strongest push, and that's really because that's where the strongest grassroots action has been lately. The Democrats embraced the minimum wage this year not because some strategist came up with it out of the blue. They were harnessing power that was coming from low-wage workers who walked off a job in hundreds of cities across the country, right? So places where there is activism building is where the momentum is going to come from, I think. We're seeing some other movement around foreclosure prevention. I think there's real untapped opportunity around student loan debt forgiveness. Students and millennials in general are completely shaped by the inequality crisis, and that could be a really good fertile ground for building youth movement around the issue.
I mean, one of the things that frustrates me. I mean, I caught this quote by Governor Cuomo in this state, who is, I think sort of could be a poster child for the sort of, and I don't even know if he even rates as a phony populist, if he even is sort of even putting on that much of a pretense. But he wrote, some people have or he said in response to, I guess, progressive pushback on his budget, he said, some people have a very narrow definition and define progressive as public finance, which I do support, which unfortunately we don't have to pass the votes. But if you look at this budget and you look at these 4 years, it's been an extraordinary progressive accomplishment. I mean, this is a guy who it would be almost impossible to sort of delineate the Pataki sort of economic plan from the Cuomo economic plan in this state. Why isn't there seemingly a broader understanding? I mean, is there a lack of understanding amongst the sort of the population in general as to how these forces connect? I mean, does it make sense? I'm asking, is it sort of like the policies that he's implemented have been, they have ads in New York touting that if you're a business, you come to New York, you won't pay taxes for 10 years. What is keeping the message from getting to a broader amount of people, do you think?
Well, we have a really strong ideology about the private sector being the savior of workers and being the savior of the economy. And, for decades now, there has been a slow and very steady and very effective campaign to discredit government action. And I think that's really coming into play here, is that it's almost impossible to think of the government as a solution to anything rather than just a source of problems. We seem to have forgotten the lessons of the WPA and the rest of the New Deal when it comes to the government's ability to really make a difference in people's lives and in the economy. And of course, also, we have a political system that's ruled by money. Economic inequality translates directly into political inequality and vice versa. And so I think that's another issue here, is that the people buying those ads that you mentioned are the ones with an interest in maintaining a status quo in which only a few people have the money and only a few people are empowered in the political system.
Zoe Carpenter from Nation Magazine, will phony populists hijack the fight against inequality? I think the quick answer is yeah. They will. But hopefully we'll push back. I appreciate you coming on and talking about this piece.